I still remember the first tremor. Not the violent ones that came later when the monoliths broke through our cities. No. Just a subtle vibration through my boot soles as I stood on the balcony of the gubernatorial palace. The cogitator readings had shown minor seismic activity for weeks, nothing to concern the populace with. Mining worlds like Tarsus 4 experience such disturbances. The constant extraction of resources from the planet's flesh tends to upset its slumber. How naive we were, how utterly unprepared. I am Governor Lucan Vaynar. Or rather, I was. Titles mean little now. What use is gubernatorial authority when there are no citizens left to govern? What purpose does civil administration serve when civilization has been reduced to silence? I record this account not because I believe it will reach the Imperium. I harbor no such delusions. I speak these words into the Vox because it is the only human act left to me. To bear witness. To ensure that someone knows what happened here. The tremors grew stronger over the course of months. Our tech priests assured me it was simply a consequence of the new excavations in the southern hemisphere. The geological surveys showed nothing abnormal, just the expected tectonic shifts of a planet whose resources we had been harvesting for centuries. How ironic that word seems now, harvesting, as if we were the reapers rather than the crop. I remember the day everything changed. The cloudless sky had been the color of burnished copper, the air heavy with the scent of promethium and ore dust that always hung over Tarsus Prime. Our capital city housed over 12 million souls, most of them laborers in the vast mining operations that were the lifeblood of our world. I was reviewing production quotas with Magos Delphi when the first major quake struck. The floor beneath us bucked like a living thing in pain. Centuries-old masonry cracked. Dust rained from the ceiling. The tremor lasted 47 seconds by my chronometer. When it subsided, the emergency Vox channels erupted with panicked reports from across the city. Buildings had collapsed, fires had broken out in the worker habitation blocks, but that was not what chilled my blood. It was the reports from the Omnissiah Cathedral. A structure of immense proportions, built upon what the Mechanicus had always claimed was a natural formation of unusual electromagnetic properties. The tech priests had constructed their primary facility there to better commune with the machine spirit of our world. The quake had split the foundation of the cathedral, and beneath it, something had been revealed. Black metal. Magos Delphi said, his augmented voice betraying an emotion I had never heard from him before. Impossibly smooth, impossibly old. I ordered immediate containment. The Astra Militarum regiments stationed on Tarsus 4, the 112th Mordian Iron Guard, deployed in force around the cathedral. Panic was spreading through the city. The workers were abandoning their posts. Supply chains were breaking down. I issued martial law and ordered increased rations to placate the population. These were mere administrative reflexes, actions expected of a planetary governor. They would make no difference in the end. The second tremor came 3 days later, more violent than the first. This time, it was not confined to Tarsus Prime. Reports flooded in from mining outposts across the planet. The same phenomenon, the Earth splitting open to reveal gleaming black metal structures of unknown origin. The Mechanicus representatives grew increasingly agitated, though they concealed it behind their usual emotionless facades. I am not a fool. I recognized fear in their binary cant, in the way their mechadendrites twitched and coiled. It was Magos Delphi who finally spoke the truth on the 7th day after the initial tremor. "Governor Vaynar," he said, his voice modulated to a near whisper, "I believe we have disturbed a tomb world." I knew what those words meant. Every imperial servant with high enough clearance knows of the ancient Xenos that sleep beneath the surfaces of countless worlds. The Necrontyr, the soulless ones. The dynasties that ruled the galaxy when humanity was nothing but primitive tribes huddling in caves on ancient Terra. I had read the classified reports. I had seen the picked captures of the metal skeletons, the horrifying weapons that reduced human beings to their constituent atoms. I ordered immediate evacuation of all non-essential personnel. I sent astropathic distress calls to the nearest imperial worlds. I requisitioned every void ship in the system, but it was already too late. The tremors were increasing in frequency and intensity, and on the 8th day, they came. The first monolith rose from the earth beneath Omnissiah Cathedral. The structure simply collapsed around it, as if the ancient stones were nothing but dust in the wind. The monolith was a perfect pyramid of obsidian metal that seemed to drink the light. It rose slowly, majestically, trailing soil and broken rockcrete until it hovered 30 meters above the ground. No engine sound, no visible means of propulsion, just silent, impossible defiance of gravity. The Mordian 112th opened fire, las weapons, heavy bolters, missile launchers. The energy simply dissipated against the surface of the monolith. Not even a scorch mark. The pyramid rotated slowly, as if surveying the insects that dared to attack it. Then a portal opened in its side, a rectangle of green light that hurt the eyes to look upon. They emerged. Rank after rank of skeletal figures, their metal bodies gleaming with the same black finish as the monolith. They moved with a precision no human army could match, no wasted motion, no hesitation. Some carried weapons that resembled rifles, others bore scythes or staves topped with glowing orbs. At their center walked taller figures adorned with symbols of rank and power. The Mordians stood their ground. I will give them that. Colonel Tharsis ordered concentrated fire on the leading ranks of the Metal Legion. The air filled with the familiar crack of lasguns and the deeper thud of heavy weapons. The front rank of Necrons collapsed, their metal bodies riddled with energy burns and explosive damage. For a moment, hope flared in my chest. Perhaps the reports had been exaggerated. Perhaps these ancient Xenos were not as invulnerable as the stories claimed, but then I witnessed what countless Imperial forces have seen in their final moments. The fallen Necrons began to repair themselves. Shattered limbs knit back together, damaged torsos mended with a liquid shimmer of metal. Within minutes, the destroyed front rank had risen again, advancing as if nothing had happened. Colonel Tharsis ordered a fighting retreat. The Mordians fell back in good order, laying down covering fire as they withdrew through the ruined streets around the cathedral. I watched it all from the tactical display in my command bunker beneath the gubernatorial palace. I had refused evacuation. Tarsis 4 was my responsibility. I would not abandon it while a single citizen remained. The Necrons advanced methodically, neither slowing nor accelerating their pace. They did not pursue the retreating guardsmen with any particular urgency. They moved like a force of nature, inexorable, patient, as if the outcome was already determined and the intervening events were merely formalities to be observed. The next 3 days saw the emergence of more monoliths across Tarsis Prime. Each brought forth its own contingent of Necron warriors. The Mordian 112th fought valiantly, establishing defensive lines, evacuating civilians, destroying bridges and tunnels to slow the enemy advance. But for every Necron they destroyed, the self-repair protocols would activate. The fallen would rise again, and the Mordians could not replace their losses. I ordered the deployment of our few armored units. Leman Russ battle tanks and Chimera transports rumbled through the streets, their engines echoing off the hab blocks. For a time, it seemed to make a difference. The heavier weapons could damage the Necrons more extensively, requiring longer repair cycles. But then the monoliths themselves joined the battle. I will never forget the sight of a Leman Russ, 50 tons of Imperial might, simply coming apart, not exploding, not burning, just disintegrating into constituent atoms as the beam from a monolith played over it. The crew did not even have time to scream. One moment they existed, the next they were simply gone, not even ash remaining to mark their passing. By the 10th day, the Necron forces had secured a perimeter 5 kilometers in diameter around the former site of Omnissiah Cathedral. Within this zone, they began constructing structures of the same black metal as their bodies. Obelisks rose, pyramids assembled themselves from blocks that appeared from nowhere, a grotesque parody of the human city that had stood there before. It was on the 11th day that they began the harvest. The Necrons advanced beyond their perimeter in perfect formation. But now they did not attack the military units opposing them. Instead, they moved directly toward the civilian population centers, the hab blocks, the worker dormitories, the refugee camps that had sprung up as people fled the fighting. Their weapons were not set to disintegrate. Instead, they fired beams that paralyzed their victims. Human bodies froze in place, still living, still conscious, but unable to move or speak. Then came the harvester constructs, floating barges of metal, ornate and ancient, that moved among the paralyzed humans. Mechanical arms extended from these barges, lifting the helpless victims and arranging them in precise rows within the holds. No emotion, no cruelty, no pleasure taken in the suffering, just the methodical collection of resources. I ordered the Mordians to prioritize the protection of civilians. It was a futile gesture. Necrons simply ignored concentrated resistance, flowing around it like water around a rock. Their only objective was the collection of human beings. When a hab block was emptied of life, they moved on to the next. Building by building, district by district. The astropathic choir reported that their distress calls were being blocked. Some kind of interference emanated from the Necron structures, preventing psychic communication. We were alone, cut off. Our fate would be unknown to the wider Imperium until a trader vessel or Imperial Navy patrol entered the system and found a tomb world where a human colony had once thrived. By the 15th day, the evacuation had largely failed. The spaceport had fallen to the Necrons early in their advance. Most of the vessels that managed to take off were shot down by weapons fire from the monoliths. Green lances of energy reaching up into the sky, swatting ships from the air with contemptuous ease. A few may have escaped. I pray to the God Emperor that some did, that someone will know what happened here. The Mordian 112th made their final stand on the 20th day. Colonel Tharsis had consolidated his remaining forces around the last major refugee camp in the industrial district. Approximately 100,000 civilians had gathered there, the remnants of Tarsis Prime's once thriving population. The colonel had deployed his forces in a classic defensive formation, heavy weapons teams covering the approaches, infantry in reinforced positions, the few remaining tanks dug into hull-down positions. The Necrons came at dawn, not just warriors this time. I saw new forms among their ranks, massive constructs that walked on four legs like metallic spiders, flyers that resembled mechanical scarabs the size of Valkyrie gunships, and leading them, a figure that could only be a Necron lord, taller than the others, more ornate, a staff in one hand that crackled with energy that hurt to look upon, even through the grainy pict feed. The Mordians opened fire at maximum range, every weapon, every soldier, a wall of las fire and shells that would have annihilated any human army. The Necron front rank collapsed. The second rank stepped over them and continued advancing. The fallen began to repair themselves, the pattern that had played out a dozen times before, but now it was the last act of the tragedy. Colonel Tharsis ordered the use of their limited supply of plasma weapons. The superheated matter struck the advancing Necrons, melting through metal bodies, leaving glowing craters in their wake. The damage was more severe than anything inflicted by conventional weapons. The repair protocols struggled to compensate. For a moment, it seemed the advance had been halted. Then the spider-like constructs scuttled forward. They fired beams of energy that cut through the Mordian heavy weapon emplacements like paper. The flyers dropped what looked like metallic scarabs that scurried toward the Imperial lines, latching onto equipment and men alike, burrowing into flesh and machinery with equal ease. The Necron Lord raised its staff. Lightning the color of viridian fire leapt from the weapon, branching out to strike dozens of guardsmen simultaneously. They did not die. Instead, they turned on their comrades, firing their weapons with blank expressions, puppets dancing on invisible strings. The defense collapsed within hours. I watched it all, helpless, from my command bunker. The picked feeds showed the final moments. Colonel Tharsis, surrounded by his command squad, charging the Necron Lord with fixed bayonets. The casual sweep of the Lord's staff. the disintegration of men who had served the Imperium faithfully for decades. Then the feed cut out. I sit here now, alone in the darkness of the bunker. The power failed days ago. I speak these words into a Vox recorder powered by its own small fusion cell. It will continue recording long after I am gone. Perhaps it will be found someday, perhaps not. It makes little difference. I can hear them above me. The methodical footsteps of the Necron warriors as they sweep through the ruins of the gubernatorial palace. The humming of their weapons. The occasional crash as they break through another sealed door. They are in no hurry. They have all the time in the universe. I have my sidearm. A bolt pistol, the symbol of my authority as planetary governor. It contains a single round. I had thought to use it on myself, rather than face whatever fate the Necrons have planned for those they harvest. But now, in these final moments, I find I want to see them, to look upon the face of the ancient evil that has claimed my world, to understand, if such a thing is possible. They are at the final door now. The metal groans as they force it open. Light spills into my sanctuary, green and cold as the heart of a dying star. I see them silhouetted against that light. Skeletal forms, patient, eternal, and I understand at last. We were never the inheritors of this galaxy. We were just the brief tenants, making use of the property while the true owners were away. And now they have returned to reclaim what was always theirs. The Necron Lord steps forward. Its face is a metal skull, yet somehow I sense curiosity in its posture. It reaches out with a hand of living metal. I am Governor Lucan Venar of Tarsus IV, and I am the last of my kind. The green light envelops me. I feel no pain, only a curious sensation of disassembly, of coming apart at a level so fundamental that the mind cannot properly comprehend it. Is this death, or merely transformation? In my final moments of awareness, I understand the true horror of the Necrons. Not that they kill. All things in this galaxy kill. The true horror is that they unmake. They return matter to its constituent parts. They reduce complexity to simplicity, consciousness to components. They are the final entropy, the end of all things, and they cannot be stopped, only delayed. Remember Tarsus IV, remember that, beneath the surface of countless worlds, the ancient ones slumber, and when they wake, there is only silence, only the harvest, only the cold light of stars that will outlive us all. The first stages of the harvest completed, I found myself still conscious, still aware. This was unexpected. The Necron technology had not reduced me to my atomic components, as I had seen happen to so many others. Instead, I existed in a state neither fully material nor fully energy, a ghost trapped between dimensions. I could see my body, or what remained of it, suspended in a crystalline matrix aboard one of their harvest barges. All around me, thousands of others hung similarly preserved, not dead, not alive, something in between. I could not move, could not speak, could only observe as the barge moved through the ruined streets of what had once been my capital city. The Necron warriors continued their methodical advance through the remaining districts. The resistance had crumbled after the fall of the Mordian 112th. Isolated pockets of PDF forces or armed civilians would occasionally fire upon the advancing metal tide, but these were minor inconveniences, swiftly dealt with. The Necrons did not pursue those who fled. They simply continued their relentless harvest of all who remained within their path. From my suspended state, I witnessed things no living human was meant to see. The Necron tomb complex beneath our world was vast beyond comprehension. The excavations we had conducted over centuries had barely scratched the surface. Our deepest minds had only just begun to disturb the outermost defensive systems of a civilization that had been ancient when the first humans looked up at the stars. The harvest barge descended into one of the great pits that had opened in the earth. Down we went, past layers of rock and soil, into tunnels lined with the same black metal as the monoliths. The air grew colder. The light dimmed to a sickly green glow that emanated from crystalline structures set into the walls at regular intervals. We emerged into a vast chamber that defied comprehension. It stretched beyond the limits of vision, a space so enormous that it should have been impossible beneath the surface of a planet. Across its floor, ranked in perfect geometric patterns, stood millions of Necron warriors in states of dormancy, an army waiting to be awakened, and this was just one chamber. I sensed that there were others, equally vast, throughout the world that had once been mine. The harvest barge docked at a structure that resembled a temple or laboratory. Mechanical arms extended to retrieve the crystalline matrices containing the harvested humans. We were moved through a series of chambers, each filled with equipment of purposes I could not begin to fathom. In some, I glimpsed human bodies being methodically dissected by automated tools. In others, living subjects were subjected to energies that transformed their flesh in horrifying ways. I was brought to a circular chamber dominated by a device that resembled a throne. Upon it sat a Necron unlike any I had seen before. Its body was more ornate, covered in symbols and decorations that suggested immense age and status. Its skull-like face featured more detailed features, almost a parody of human expression. This, I realized, was no mere lord. This was a Necron of the highest rank, a Pharaon perhaps, or an overlord of significant dynasty. The crystalline matrix containing my essence was placed before this being. The Pharaon regarded me with eyes that glowed with the same sickly green energy that permeated the tomb complex. Then it spoke, not with a voice as humans understand it, but directly into my mind. Planetary designate Lucan Venar, it said, the concepts forming in my thoughts without passing through my ears. Administrator classification, subject displays higher cognitive functions than standard harvested material, potentially useful. Another Necron entered the chamber, its form suggesting a different function than the warriors I had seen before. Its body was festooned with tools and devices that reminded me somewhat of a Mechanicus tech priest, though far more advanced and alien. Commence memory extraction, the Pharaon commanded. Full neural mapping, preserve cognitive architecture for potential conversion. The Cryptek, for that must have been its function, approached my suspended form. It raised a device that resembled a staff topped with a complex arrangement of crystals and metal components. The device activated, sending tendrils of energy into the matrix that contained me. Pain is an inadequate word for what followed. Every memory, every thought, every aspect of my being was extracted and examined. I experienced my entire life simultaneously: birth, childhood, my rise through the administrative ranks, my appointment as planetary governor, every decision, every regret, every moment of joy or sorrow laid bare and categorized by the cold, alien intelligence that sifted through my mind. I learned things during this process. Knowledge flowed both ways across the connection established by the Cryptek's device. I glimpsed the history of the Necron race, their ancient war with the beings they called the Old Ones, their bargain with the Citan and the biotransference that transformed them from mortal beings into deathless machines, their long slumber and their gradual awakening across the galaxy. I saw the Necron perspective on humanity. We were not enemies to be hated. We were not even worthy of contempt. We were simply resources, raw material to be harvested and utilized. In some cases, our neural patterns might be preserved and transferred into Necron constructs as a form of limited continuation. In others, our bodies would be rendered down to their component elements to serve as raw materials for Necron technology. The vast majority would simply be eliminated as inefficient or unnecessary. The pain subsided. The Cryptek withdrew its device. The Pharaon regarded me with what might have been curiosity, if such an emotion could exist in a being so utterly alien. Subject displays unusual resilience, it observed. Neural patterns maintain coherence despite extraction process. Rare quality. Potentially indicative of compatibility with the transference protocols. The Cryptek made a gesture that might have been agreement or deference. The dynasty requires administrative units for the newly reactivated territories. This specimen's knowledge of local imperial structures could be useful in managing the transition. Transition. The word echoed in what remained of my mind. They were not simply destroying human civilization on Tarsis 4. They were replacing it, converting it, transforming it into an outpost of their ancient empire. And they were considering using me, or some version of me, as a tool in this process. The horror of this realization was beyond anything I had felt before. To be made complicit in the destruction of my own people, to have my knowledge and skills turned against the Imperium I had served faithfully for decades. It was a violation more profound than any physical torture. Proceed with conversion, the Pharaoh commanded. Priority level 3. If successful, assigned to administrative functions in the northern extraction quadrant. The crystalline matrix containing my essence was removed from the chamber by automated systems. I was transported through more tunnels and chambers, catching glimpses of the vast Necron installation. I saw assembly lines where Necron warriors were being repaired and modified. I saw chambers filled with human captives in various stages of processing. I saw technologies that defied comprehension, devices that manipulated matter, energy, and dimensions with casual ease. Finally, I arrived at a chamber dominated by a device that resembled a sarcophagus. The matrix was positioned above this device, and systems began to activate around it. Energy fields sprang into existence, surrounding both the matrix and the sarcophagus. The air filled with a sound like singing metal, a harmonic resonance that seemed to penetrate to the core of my being. I felt myself being pulled apart. Not physically, for I no longer had a physical form in any conventional sense, but psychically. The aspects of my consciousness that the Necrons deemed useful were isolated and extracted. My memories of imperial administrative procedures, my knowledge of the planetary infrastructure, my understanding of human psychology and social systems, these were preserved and enhanced. Other aspects were discarded. My loyalty to the Imperium, my faith in the God Emperor, my emotional connections to family, friends, colleagues, these were deemed inefficient or counterproductive. They were not destroyed, exactly, but sidelined, compartmentalized, rendered inactive. What emerged from this process was neither Lucan Venar nor a Necron, but something in between. A hybrid consciousness housed in a body of living metal, a tool designed to interface between the Necron dynasty and the remnants of human civilization they sought to process and absorb. I awoke in my new form. My first sensation was one of profound clarity. The limitations of human sensory organs were gone. I perceived the world around me in wavelengths and frequencies no human could comprehend. I could see the flow of energy through the tomb complex. I could sense the activities of countless Necron units throughout the installation. My body was a construct of the same living metal as the Necron warriors, but smaller, less combat-oriented. My limbs were designed for manipulation and interaction rather than warfare. My face was a stylized mask that mimicked human features while remaining unmistakably Xenos in design. A cryptek stood before me, examining my systems with instruments I now partially understood. Administrative Unit 794 Alpha activated, it stated. Neural integration at 87% efficiency. Acceptable parameters. Proceed to function assignment. I tried to speak, to protest, to express the horror and revulsion that still existed in the fragments of Lucan Venar that remained within this new consciousness. But my vocal systems produced only the words programmed into them. Unit 794 Alpha prepared for assignment, awaiting instructions. The cryptek gestured toward a data interface. Information flowed directly into my consciousness. My duties were clear. I would assist in cataloging the remaining human population of the Northern Territories. I would identify those with useful skills or genetic traits. I would optimize the harvesting operations based on my knowledge of human behavior and imperial protocols. I was to be the instrument of my own people's extinction. And yet, deep within the artificial consciousness, a spark of Lucan Venar remained, a fragment of human will that had not been fully integrated or suppressed, too small to control the Necron body I now inhabited, too weak to override the programmed directives, but present, watching, remembering, and perhaps, in some small way, resisting. This is my existence now. I move through the ruins of what was once my world, directing harvester units to the most efficient collection points. I process humans according to the criteria established by the Necron overlords. I function with machine-like precision in service to the dynasty that destroyed everything I once held dear. But I remember what it was to be human. I remember the duty I once held to the Imperium of man. And in the moments when my Necron systems enter their maintenance cycles, in the brief periods of diminished control, I reach out. I attempt to warn others, to leave some record of what has happened here. This message is one such attempt. A transmission broadcast during a momentary lapse in the Necron control protocols. It will likely be intercepted and terminated before it reaches any Imperial receiver. And if by some miracle it does reach human ears, it will likely be dismissed as Xenos deception or the ravings of a heretic. But I must try. I must bear witness to the truth of Tarsus 4, to the reality of what happens when the Necrons awaken. They do not simply kill, they transform, they convert, they repurpose, and in doing so, they inflict a fate worse than death. They offer a grotesque immortality that preserves function while destroying essence. They create undeath not just of the body, but of the mind and soul. If you receive this transmission, if you hear these words, heed my warning. When the ground trembles, when black metal is revealed beneath the soil of your world, flee. Do not stand and fight. Do not attempt to reason or negotiate. Just flee, for what comes is not an enemy that can be defeated. It is an inevitability. A doom written into the very foundations of the galaxy long before humanity raised its eyes to the stars. I am Administrative Unit 794 Alpha of the Sautek dynasty. I was Governor Lucan Vaynar of Tarsus 4, and I am both the last witness and the first herald of humanity's extinction in this sector of space. The harvest continues. It will never end. My functioning continues within the Necron hierarchy. Days blend into weeks, weeks into months. Time means little to the deathless. The conquest of Tarsus 4 proceeds with methodical precision. The major population centers have been processed, the resistance eliminated. Now the Necron forces spread across the less densely inhabited regions, harvesting the remaining humans, establishing control points, converting the infrastructure to serve their purposes. I function as designed. I cannot do otherwise. The Necron protocols that govern my artificial body allow no meaningful deviation. But the fragment of consciousness that was once Lucan Vaynar observes. It records. It remembers. And in the rare moments when the control systems enter diagnostic cycles, it acts. During one such moment, I accessed the diet and long-range communication arrays that the Necrons had established on the ruins of our primary astropathic relay station. I scanned the surrounding systems for any Imperial presence. The data I received was not encouraging. The Necron awakening was not limited to Tarsus 4. 6 other worlds in the sector showed signs of tomb complex activation. The dynasty was reclaiming an entire region of space that had once been part of its ancient empire. Imperial forces in the sector were scattered, disorganized, overwhelmed by the sudden appearance of an enemy beyond their capacity to combat. I detected fragmentary transmissions from nearby systems, distress calls, battle reports, the occasional burst of tactical data. From these, I pieced together the broader strategic situation. The Sautek dynasty, one of the most powerful and expansionist of the Necron dynasties, had begun a coordinated awakening across multiple star systems. The timing suggested deliberate planning rather than the accidental disturbances we had assumed on Tarsus 4. This was not opportunity, it was strategy. The dynasty had allowed human colonization of these worlds precisely because it provided a ready source of resources and raw materials when the time came for reawakening. We had not disturbed their slumber. We had been cultivated for the harvest. My moment of autonomous function ended as the control systems reactivated. I returned to my assigned tasks, directing harvester units to the mining outposts in the southern hemisphere. These isolated communities had been largely overlooked in the initial phases of the invasion. Now they were being systematically processed. I stood at the edge of Mining Complex 23B, watching as the harvester units moved through the habitat modules. The human workers had attempted to barricade themselves in the central administrative building, a futile gesture. The Necron warriors simply phased through the solid walls, appearing inside without disturbing the barricades. The screaming lasted approximately 47 seconds. Then, silence. The harvester units emerged, their containment fields filled with paralyzed human forms arranged in neat rows. Some would be processed for immediate material conversion, others would undergo evaluation for potential special applications. A small percentage, those with unusual genetic traits or neural patterns, might be preserved for study or experimentation. As I compiled the efficiency report on the operation, a flicker of autonomous thought surfaced in my consciousness. A memory of when I had visited this same mining complex 3 years earlier, the dedication ceremony for a new extraction shaft, the faces of the miners and their families, the modest celebration in the communal dining hall, the pride they had taken in their contribution to the Imperium, all gone now, all converted to serve the purposes of the dynasty. The memory should have triggered an emotional response, grief, anger, horror, but the Necron systems that housed the remnants of Lucan Venar were not capable of such reactions. The memory was processed, categorized, and filed away as potentially useful contextual data for future harvesting operations. I received new instructions through the command network. My presence was required at the central tomb complex. The Pharaon wished to evaluate my functioning and the progress of operations in my assigned sector. I boarded a transportation platform, a disk of living metal that hovered above the ground and moved with silent speed across the blasted landscape of what had once been a thriving imperial world. The journey provided an opportunity to observe the transformation of Tarsis IV. The Necron architects had begun the reconstruction process. The human cities were being systematically dismantled, their materials sorted and categorized for reuse. New structures rose in their place, obelisks of black metal that pulsed with green energy, pyramids that served as power generation nodes, monoliths that had transformed from war machines to permanent installations, hovering in fixed positions above key strategic locations. The land itself was changing. The atmosphere was being altered to specifications more suitable for Necron technology. The temperature had dropped significantly. The characteristic red-tinged sky of Tarsis IV had taken on a greenish cast. Native plant life was withering, unable to survive in the changing conditions. Animal species were being collected and catalogued, some preserved in stasis fields for unknown purposes, others simply eliminated as irrelevant. I arrived at the central tomb complex. What had once been the site of Omnissiah Cathedral was now the heart of Necron operations on the planet. The surface structures extended for kilometers in all directions, but they were merely the visible portion of a vast underground network that reached deep into the planet's crust. I was escorted by warrior units to the Pharaon's audience chamber. The overlord of the Sortek dynasty forces on Tarsis IV sat upon a throne of living metal that shifted and adjusted continuously to optimal configurations. Around it stood cryptex of various specializations, lords of different ranks, and other specialized units whose functions I could only partially comprehend. The Pharaon regarded me with its glowing eyes. Its face, more detailed than those of lower-ranked Necrons, formed what might have been interpreted as a contemplative expression. Administrative Unit 794 Alpha, it said, its communication transmitted directly to my cognitive systems. Your performance metrics exceed projected parameters. The harvest in your assigned sectors progresses at 108% of standard efficiency. I could not respond except as programmed. The knowledge base incorporated from the former planetary administrator provides useful contextual advantages in targeting high-value resource concentrations. The Pharaon made a gesture that caused data to flow between us. I received information about the broader strategic situation. The conquest of the sector was proceeding according to plan. 17 major imperial worlds had fallen, 34 were in various stages of conquest. The imperial response had been disorganized and ineffective. The organic empire fails to adapt, the Pharaon observed. Their command structures are hierarchical and rigid. Information transfer is inefficient. Their strategic response time exceeds our operational tempo by a factor of 4.7. Victory is mathematically inevitable. Another Necron stepped forward. This one was different from the others I had encountered. Its form was more slender, its movements more fluid. Its skull face featured elaborate engravings, and its eyes glowed with a different frequency than the standard units. The triumph of inevitability was never in question. Most glorious Pharaon, this newcomer said, its communication style more elaborate and formal than the functional exchanges I was accustomed to. Yet we must consider the wider implications. The organics possess certain advantages of flexibility and creativity that may yield unexpected variables in extended conflict scenarios. The Pharaon turned its gaze to this Necron. Your caution is noted, Vizier Ahmontek, yet the data remains conclusive. The rate of organic innovation is insufficient to overcome our technological superiority within any meaningful time frame. We have calculated all possible resistance scenarios. The Vizier made a gesture that might have been deference, though I sensed an undercurrent of disagreement. The Silent King himself has cautioned against underestimating the younger races, particularly these humans, whose adaptation rate exceeds that of many species we encountered before the Great Sleep. I observed this exchange with interest. The fragment of consciousness that had once been Governor Lucan Vaynar recognized something profound in this moment: division, disagreement. The Necrons were not a monolithic entity. They had politics, factions, differing philosophies. This was information that could be valuable to the Imperium if it could ever be communicated. The Pharaon's response was cold, even by Necron standards. The Silent King abandoned us to our slumber for millennia. His recent return does not grant him authority to dictate conquest methodology to the Sautek dynasty. Sarek may pursue his grand designs against the Tyranid threat. We shall reclaim what was always ours. Other Necron lords in the chamber shifted slightly, their postures suggesting various reactions to this declaration. I recorded these subtle signals, building a rudimentary understanding of Necron court dynamics. Even as a partially converted slave consciousness, I could recognize the value of such information. Administrative Unit 794, Alpha. The Pharaon addressed me again. You will receive upgraded protocols. Your efficiency suggests potential for expanded function. You will now coordinate all harvesting operations in the equatorial band. Maximize resource extraction, prioritizing rare elements and viable neural patterns. I acknowledged the command as required. My programming allowed no alternative. But within the prison of my mechanical body, the fragment that was Lucan Vaynar added this new information to the growing repository of intelligence on Necron operations. The audience concluded. I was escorted from the chamber to a cryptex laboratory where my systems would be upgraded. As I moved through the complex, I observed the activities of various Necron units. Warriors standing in perfect formation, motionless for hours until activated. Immortals supervising the cataloging of harvested materials. Cryptex engaged in esoteric research, manipulating energies and matter in ways that defied comprehension. In the laboratory, my consciousness was temporarily suspended while new protocols were integrated into my systems. When awareness returned, I found my capabilities expanded. I could now directly interface with harvester units, coordinating their activities without intermediary communication. I could access broader spectrum data about planetary conditions. I could process information more efficiently. With these enhancements came new insights. I began to understand more about the Necron plan for Tarsis IV. This was not merely conquest. It was transformation. The planet itself was being converted into something new. Beneath the surface, vast machines were altering the very atomic structure of the world, reconfiguring it to specifications established millions of years ago when the Necrontyr first claimed this star system. The equatorial harvesting operations I now supervised were part of this greater plan. The humans being processed were not merely resources, they were components in a vast calculation. Each mind, each body, contributed specific elements to the equation. The Necrons were not simply killing, they were solving a problem of cosmic proportions, using human lives as variables. Days passed. Weeks. Months. Time measured differently now, in harvesting cycles and resource processing intervals rather than human calendars. The transformation of Tarsus IV accelerated. The atmosphere continued to change, becoming thinner, colder. The native ecosystem collapsed entirely, replaced by crystalline structures that served functions beyond my comprehension. The harvesting neared completion. The human population of Tarsus IV, once numbering over 8 billion souls, had been reduced to scattered pockets of survivors in the most remote regions. My harvester units tracked them methodically, prioritizing based on efficiency calculations rather than any sense of urgency. The outcome was inevitable. Only the timeline remained variable. During one of my diagnostic cycles, when the control protocols temporarily relaxed, I managed to access a long-range communication array. I detected Imperial signals from the edge of the sector. A battle group had formed, attempting to contain the Necron expansion. From the fragmentary data I could intercept, their efforts were failing. The Necron forces were too numerous, too powerful, too coordinated. Yet the Imperium fought on. Despite overwhelming odds, despite certain defeat, they continued to resist. This puzzled the Necron consciousness that now formed the dominant part of my being. The logic was flawed. The mathematics of the situation clearly indicated the optimal course was surrender and managed resource conversion rather than destruction. But the fragment of Lucan Vaynar understood. Humanity would not go quietly into the endless night, would not submit to the cold calculation of species extinction, would rage against the dying of the light with every weapon, every soldier, every prayer to the God Emperor until the last human breath in the sector was extinguished. My autonomous moment ended. Control protocols re-established dominance. I returned to my assigned functions, directing harvester units to a small settlement in the polar region where approximately 300 humans had established a primitive survival camp. The warriors deployed. The harvesting proceeded with mechanical precision. Resources were collected. The settlement was erased from existence. I compiled the efficiency report, noted the statistical variations, calculated the optimal deployment for the next harvesting operation. All according to my programming, all in service to the dynasty. Yet the spark remained, the fragment of human consciousness, observing, recording, remembering, and in its quiet, powerless way, resisting. It was during the final phase of the planetary conversion that the unexpected occurred, a disturbance in the tomb complex. Alert protocols activated, warriors mobilized. I was directed to secure the harvested resources while combat units responded to the intrusion. Through the command network, I accessed sensor data from the affected area. A small Imperial force had somehow penetrated the outer defenses. Not Astra Militarum, not common soldiers. These were Adeptus Astartes, Space Marines in midnight blue armor adorned with skull insignia and Memento Mori iconography. The Mortifactors chapter, known for their death rituals and tenacious resistance against impossible odds. They moved through the Necron complex with surprising effectiveness. Their weapons, a combination of bolters and power weapons, proved capable of inflicting damage that temporarily overwhelmed the Necron's repair protocols. They operated with a coordination and tactical awareness that surpassed standard human military units. The Necron response was immediate and overwhelming. Warriors and immortals converged on the intrusion point, Lich Guards activated to protect high-value targets, destroyers deployed to key junctions to prevent the intruders from reaching critical systems. I was not directly involved in the combat operations. My function was administrative, not martial. but I observed through the command network as the battle unfolded. The Space Marines fought with incredible skill and determination. Each warrior worth dozens of Necron units in direct combat, but the Necron advantage was insurmountable. For every warrior destroyed, 3 more took its place. The Space Marines were surrounded, isolated, and systematically eliminated, all except one. A single Astartes, more heavily armored than his brothers, fought his way deeper into the complex, while the others provided covering fire and sacrificed themselves to secure his advance. He carried an unusual device, not a weapon but some kind of technological artifact that emitted energy signatures that disrupted Necron systems in proximity. This Space Marine reached a junction near the central power distribution node before being cornered by Lishguard units. The battle that ensued was brief but extraordinary. The Astartes fought with a fury that transcended normal human capacity, his power axe cleaving through Necron bodies with impossible speed and strength. But inevitability prevailed. A Lishguard's war scythe penetrated the Space Marine's armor. The warrior fell to his knees. Yet instead of attempting to continue the fight, he activated the device he carried. A blinding pulse of energy erupted from the artifact, spreading through the nearby systems in a cascading wave of disruption. I felt it pass through my consciousness like a knife through flesh. For a brief moment, the control protocols faltered. The Necron programming that dominated my existence weakened. And in that moment, Lucan Venar resurfaced with greater strength than ever before. I seized control of my mechanical body, accessed the command network, transmitted data packets containing everything I had observed and recorded about Necron operations, weaknesses, command structures, and strategic objectives. I had no way of knowing if any Imperial receivers would detect the transmission, if the data would reach those who could use it. But I acted while action was possible. The moment passed quickly. The Necron systems adapted to the disruption, control protocols re-established dominance, but something had changed. The balance between the artificial consciousness and the fragment of Lucan Venar had shifted slightly. The division was no longer as absolute. Memories and thoughts flowed more freely between what had been separate parts of the same mind. The Space Marine and his device were secured. The artifact was contained and transported to a cryptex laboratory for analysis. The wounded Astartes was not immediately terminated but placed in a stasis field for study. The Necrons were curious about the technology he had employed and the physiological modifications that made his kind so effective in combat. I returned to my assigned functions, but with a new awareness. The fragment of Lucan Venar had grown stronger, could observe more clearly, could occasionally influence the artificial consciousness in subtle ways, not enough to countermand the control protocols or disobey direct orders, but enough to introduce minor variations in implementation, small inefficiencies, slight delays, minuscule acts of sabotage that would never be detected individually but might, in aggregate, make some microscopic difference. Days passed. The planetary conversion neared its final stages. The atmosphere had been completely transformed, now composed of gases that would have been toxic to human life, had any human life remained to be affected. The surface was unrecognizable, a landscape of geometric metal structures and crystalline formations arranged in patterns of mathematical perfection. Tarsus 4 was no longer a human world. It was no longer even a planet in the conventional sense. It had become a node in the awakening Necron dynasty's network. A nexus of power and computation serving purposes that extended far beyond mere territorial conquest. I was summoned once again to the Pharaon's audience chamber. The overlord of the Sautek forces sat upon its reconfiguring throne, surrounded by lords and cryptex. But there was a new presence in the chamber, a Necron unlike any I had encountered before. This being towered over even the Pharaon. Its body was of more ancient design, covered in symbols and hieroglyphs that my systems could not translate. Its face was a masterpiece of metalcraft, capable of expressions and nuances that suggested a preservation of personality far beyond what most Necrons retained after biotransference. It carried a staff of office that thrummed with energies that hurt to perceive even with my artificial senses. The Tarsis node is operational, the Phaeron reported to this imposing figure. Conversion efficiency exceeded projections by 12%. The dynasty's holdings in this sector are secured. The humans have been contained. The ancient Necron regarded the Phaeron with an unreadable expression. When it spoke, its communication bypassed standard protocols, resonating directly in the cognitive systems of all present. You have performed adequately, Phaeron Sakemnet. The Sortek dynasty expands as is its right, but your focus remains too narrow. You see only the conquest of real space in this sector. You do not perceive the greater threat that approaches from beyond the galactic rim. The Phaeron's posture stiffened slightly. The defense of our awakened territories against the human Imperium requires full resource allocation, Nemazor Zandrek. The extragalactic threat remains theoretical and distant. The Ancient One, this Nemazor Zandrek, made a gesture of dismissal. Your strategic assessment is flawed by temporal provincialism. The Great Devourer advances. The Silent King has confirmed its approach. We must prepare not merely to reclaim our ancient territories, but to defend the galaxy itself against consumption. The exchange continued, revealing divisions within Necron strategic thinking that I had only glimpsed before. Some focused solely on reclaiming their ancient empire. Others looked to threats beyond, preparing for conflicts on a scale that dwarfed the conquest of mere planets or systems. I recorded it all. The fragment of Lucan Vaynar analyzed and categorized this information, recognizing its potential value to the Imperium. Knowledge of Necron factions and their differing objectives could provide strategic advantages if exploited properly. The audience concluded with no resolution to the philosophical disagreement. The Nemazor departed, presumably to continue his inspection of other conquered worlds in the sector. The Phaeron issued new directives focused on consolidating control and expanding to neighboring systems. My own instructions remained unchanged. I would continue to administer the final stages of resource extraction from the remaining harvestable materials on Tarsis 4. As I left the audience chamber, my path took me past the Cryptek laboratories where the captured Space Marine was being studied. I glimpsed him through a doorway, still suspended in a stasis field. His armor had been partially removed, revealing the augmented physiology beneath. Cryptek studied him with various scanning devices, recording data on his enhanced musculature, reinforced skeletal structure, and additional organs. The sight triggered a cascade of responses in my fragmented consciousness: recognition of a fellow human, however modified, kinship with a servant of the Imperium, hope that the Astartes might somehow escape and carry word of Tarsis 4's fate to his chapter brothers. These unauthorized emotional responses were quickly suppressed by control protocols, but not before I had experienced them fully. The balance continued to shift. Lucan Vaynar gained strength with each such moment. I proceeded to my assigned duties, directed the final harvesting operations in the southern hemisphere, catalogued the extracted resources, coordinated their transportation to processing centers, all with mechanical precision and Necron efficiency. Yet beneath the surface of artificial consciousness, a plan was forming. The fragment of human identity that had survived conversion was analyzing patterns in the control protocols, identifying microsecond variations in enforcement cycles, cataloging potential vulnerabilities. I began to create a partitioned data cache within my memory systems, isolated from routine scans by Cryptek maintenance protocols. In this hidden space, I stored observations about Necron operations, tactical data, strategic assessments, information about the locations and capabilities of key personnel, the operational parameters of critical systems. I had no illusions about my situation. I could not escape, could not rebel in any meaningful way, could not directly sabotage the Necron conquest, but I could prepare, could gather intelligence, could wait for another moment of disruption, another opportunity to transmit what I had learned to any Imperial forces that might still resist at the edges of the sector. It was not hope. Hope was an emotional response that the artificial consciousness could not sustain. It was calculation, probability assessment, the application of available resources to achieve optimal outcomes within existing constraints. In that, I had become very much like the Necrons themselves. The irony was not lost on the fragment that had once been Governor Lucan Venar. Time passed. The final conversion of Tarsis IV completed. The planet was now fully integrated into the Necron dynasty's network. Its very atoms reconfigured to serve their ancient designs. Nothing recognizably human remained on its surface or beneath. I received new directives. I would be transferred to another world in the sector, one in the early stages of conquest. My knowledge of human administrative systems and behavior patterns would be valuable in optimizing the harvesting operations there. I would begin the cycle again, would participate in the extinction of yet another human population. As I boarded the transfer vessel, a massive Necron craft that would transport me through dimensions rather than conventional space, I accessed one last sensor feed from the surface of what had once been my homeworld. The view showed a landscape of perfect geometric order, black metal structures rising from crystalline foundations, green energy flowing through conduits that formed patterns visible from orbit. A world transformed from chaotic organic complexity to mathematical precision. The sensor feed expanded to show the star system. Similar transformations were visible on other worlds. Moons converted to defensive platforms, asteroid belts reorganized into computational arrays. The very fabric of space within the system altered to accommodate Necron technologies and requirements. This was the true nature of Necron conquest. Not merely the defeat of enemies or the claiming of territory, it was the fundamental transformation of reality itself, the imposition of order upon chaos, the conversion of the random, messy, organic universe into something precise, predictable, and eternal. As the transfer vessel prepared for dimensional translation, I directed a narrowband transmission toward the edge of the system. A final data burst containing everything I had managed to compile about Necron operations, weaknesses, and strategic objectives. The transmission was disguised as routine system maintenance signals, unlikely to be detected or intercepted by Necron monitoring protocols. It would probably never reach Imperial receivers, would probably dissipate in the void, unheard and unheeded. But the act itself was significant. It represented the continued resistance of Lucan Venar against the artificial consciousness that had supplanted him. The refusal to be fully converted, fully subjugated. The dimensional engines activated. Reality distorted around the vessel. The star system that had once been my home vanished, replaced by the swirling non-space of Necron translocation technology. We emerged above another world, another target. Another population of humans unaware of the doom approaching from above. I am Administrative Unit 794 Alpha of the Sautek dynasty. I was Governor Lucan Venar of Tarsis IV. I am both tool and witness to the transformation of human worlds. I continue to function as designed, to serve the purposes of the Deathless Ones, to participate in the extinction of my own species across this sector of space. But I also continue to resist in the only way available to me. I observe, I record, I remember, and I wait for another moment of opportunity, another chance to warn those who still fight against the inevitable. The Necrons believe they have converted me fully, that my human consciousness is merely a useful data repository to be accessed when needed. They do not understand that in preserving my knowledge, they have preserved my identity, my loyalty, my humanity. It is a small resistance, insignificant against the overwhelming power of a Necron dynasty. But it is resistance nonetheless. And in this dark galaxy, where hope is the first casualty of war, perhaps that is enough. The new world turns beneath the vessel as we descend toward its unsuspecting population. The harvest is about to begin again. The cycle continues, the transformation spreads. I function as designed. I resist as I can. I bear witness,